So let's begin. Tonight's guest has practiced for over 40 years as a palliative care physician in the United Kingdom, Ireland, Canada, and North America. Prior to tonight's book, he has written 3 other books: Mortally Wounded, Stories of Soul, Pain, Death, and Healing, also A Place of Healing, Working with Nature and Soul at the End of Life, and The Nest in the Stream. His new book is a departure, however, as it's a novel titled Becoming Force, A Story of Deep Belonging, published by All Night Books. We are so pleased to have Michael launch his book here at Chaucer's. So please welcome Michael Kearney. Welcome.
Thank you, Michael.
So you did a little walk a little bit ago. Across the country. What was that, a couple miles or something like that? Or
Oh, yeah. Radley and I are just back from Europe, and we were walking the Camino de Santiago, walking the Portuguese Camino. We walked from Porto up to Santiago.
you've done you've done the other routes too as well, correct?
Yeah, we've done the so-called French Camino, and which goes over the Alps and into Spain and across the north of Spain. Spanish Camino.
Wow.
Yeah.
So how many days were you walking for?
At this time we walked for, I walked for 10 days, Radley walked for 3 weeks.
Wow.
Joined by Josh, our eldest son, for the final week. Yeah, we walked probably about 230 miles or so in that time.
Wow, that's incredible. You
Yeah,
look
it's an
pretty strong.
amazing thing to do.
Yeah.
You know, the Camino's been a pilgrimage, walk for over 1,000 years. So you kind of really feel like you're walking in some very ancient tracks.
Wow.
And walking with some amazing people. You meet just incredible people along the way.
I bet.
Yeah. So-
Interesting.
And actually, it's a sort of a little echo of the book, because there's a big piece of the later part of the book. Aisling, who's the protagonist, and this young Buddhist monk that she's met sitting under the Bodhi tree, Dorje, actually decide to go on the roads of India walking together, and they walk and they talk and share ideas. And that's a little bit like what it's like on the Camino, especially with Radley. Lots of ideas to talk.
Couple more questions and I'll let you turn it over to you. In terms of, you finished the book, but then you did this walk, and I was wondering about, was the book on your mind when you were doing this walk, or were you totally locked in and focused on participating in this walk?
The book's been very much on my mind and heart, it's coincides with me semi-retiring, I would say, stepping back from my day job and still working some at weekends, but really making that transition, and that transition just coinciding with the book coming out. And so really having time to kind of share some of what's in the book, I hope, and particularly through a project that's associated with the book, which I'll say just a little bit about at the end, which is called the Becoming Forest Project. Yeah. And so hoping to have time for that, and looking forward to that, and excited about that. So that's been very much on my mind.
So speaking of writing, you wrote 3 books on healing and just life. However, this one's a novel, so it's quite a departure from what you're used to. I was just wondering why you changed tracks to write fiction as opposed to what you've been doing previously.
Yeah, and I'll say a little more about that shortly, but what I would say at this stage is, the other 3 books were, well, first 2 were non-fiction, and the third one is a sort of memoir.
Okay.
But this one is fiction. I was told afterwards, I didn't realize at the time of writing that I was writing allegorical fiction. You know, that's kind of how so it's sort of fiction with an educational, in the very broad sense, intent in the background. And because I'm particularly hoping that this maybe, I really like the story and the you know, some of the ideas and practices in the book. I'd really like young people to encounter them, because I'm hoping it'll be helpful to people of all ages, but particularly young people, as I'll say a little more about in a moment. And I just thought actually putting something out in story form, you know, here we are in Chaucer's books, but one hears so much about how reading habits have changed and how, you know, a younger generation is scrolling and, you know, kind of coming to their media digitally. So that was partly behind it, actually thinking, how could I, you know, what shape or form could appeal to a younger readership as well as.
Interesting.
Yeah, so that was partly. And partly it was just something that happened, and I'll say more about that, as I was sitting myself under the Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya in India, and just got the idea to tell a story.
Can you briefly tell the story, and I'm just going to sit back and have you read some of it?
Will I kind of, can I just go through a little bit?
Whatever you want to do.
And I'm going to come to a reading,
All right.
if I may, at the end.
Great,
Yeah.
great.
Good. So thank you, Michael, very much, and I'm very grateful to Chaucer's for your hospitality and for hosting this, and for your support always.
Thank you.
My favorite bookstore, really, truly. And but I also just want to say a quick thank you to some other folks. I want to say thanks. It wasn't actually Rattle who made the cookies. It was Peter Moreno, who's here, and
Yes, enjoy the cookies.
yeah, thank you.
Sparkling cider also.
I also want to say thanks to just some others. There's so many people who've been kind of part of this along the way. It's been a collaborative project, a community project. One of the big thank yous is to Tess Leake, who is an artist in Ireland. She's actually English, living in Ireland, who did the artwork that you'll see in the book. She drew the images in the book. I want to thank Ben, who's here, and Josh, who's not here, who were a great help. This book was published as what's called a hybrid publishing, so it's a traditional publisher, but with some input financially from me as the author. And so I needed to do a Kickstarter because it was kind of costly. And Ben and Josh were just among others, but they were particularly a great help in getting that together. Just want to say thanks to my agent, Arnie Kotler, to my publisher, David Wilk, to my editor, Sham Kair. And I want to say a particular thank you just to 5 other folks, real quick. I want to say a big thank you to Joanna Macy, who is a friend, a mentor, and who really inspired the book. It was she who shared her love of Buddhism, but also her love of trees, and she introduced me to the whole idea that of how much the Buddha loved trees and what a huge part trees played in the life of the Buddha. For example, after the Buddha's death, which was about 500 BC, after his death, the Buddha was not represented as in his human form until about 500 years later. That's when the first statue of the Buddha appeared. But for 500 years he was depicted in images, and the image for his enlightenment was the tree, the Bodhi tree. And there are many other stories about the Buddha and the Bodhi tree. But Joanna introduced me to that, and she also introduced me to so much more. Another central idea in the book, that I got from Joanna is, you know, not to be afraid of our pain for the world. When we look at our world and we feel pain, as all of us are feeling at the moment, when we look at what's unfolding in the Middle East, what's unfolding, you know, even before the Middle East, there's just so much suffering, but you know, this recent awful suffering that's so close in so many ways. Joanna would say, you know, don't shut down, keep your heart open. But the only way you can do that is if you're kind of rooted in something deeper than yourself. And so I learned so much from Joanna. I want to say a big thank you to her. I want to say a big thank you to my Native American teachers, Wolf and Lisa Wapipa, who aren't here tonight, but who've taught me so much. I made a little movie with them some time back, which if anybody's interested in, it's in the guest book project online, but it's called Listening to the Earth, and being with Wolf and Lisa and listening to Wolf and Lisa is like listening to the earth. It's like listening to the earth speak. And when Lisa talks about the earth is our mother, she's not just saying it as a metaphor. She means that, and she communicates that. I want to say thank you to His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and particularly for his lesson. I've been lucky enough to go to visit in Dharamsala where he lives and to sit at his feet and to kind of receive teachings. And each time I've gone, the same message is the most important thing for us all to understand is our interdependence, that we are not solitary separate beings, that we are interdependent on one another and on the rest of life. I want to say thanks to Radley, who's here, my wife, and Camino partner, introduced me to Buddhism, coaxing me to India, and whose attitudes to spiritual teachings are kind of very much those of Dorje in the book, who's the young Tibetan monk who Aisling, the young Irish protagonist, meets on her travels. And his attitude is, these wonderful spiritual teachings that we get from our traditions are so valuable and so important. How can we possibly make them available in an easy, accessible way to as many people as possible? That's Dorje's question, and that's always Radley's question too. So thank you for that. And I want to say thank you too to Mother Bodhi Tree in India, who I've been lucky enough to sit with on 3 occasions, and to all the trees. The book was written outdoors in forests. I don't think I wrote a single word indoors. So I really feel like we've kind of written this together, myself and the trees. Just to say a little bit about the inspiration for the book. You know, I've worked, as Michael said, as a physician for many years and in palliative care with very seriously ill people and their families, some of whom are approaching the end of their lives. And I've kind of felt like palliative care and the care I offer, we offer as a team, and I'm so delighted to see so many of my palliative care co-workers here tonight. What we're doing is a sort of microcosm of our world. We're looking after a few who are going through great suffering and great uncertainty, but it's really like a microcosm of what's happening in the greater world. And I kind of felt, you know, it's so all-consuming and it's so demanding. It's taken all my time and energy to do that. I've been very aware of what's happening in the wider world with, you know, particularly with climate, with the climate crisis, but also the famines, the wars, and so. But I felt up to a few years ago, I felt my lot is looking after the microcosm. That's enough. But then 10 years ago, in 2013, my first grandchild was born. And when he was born, and I think at that stage I had just turned 60, I've just turned 70, I thought, when he is my age, what is our world going to be like? And suddenly, what was kind of an abstract concern for what's going on in our world became very personal. And I just asked myself, is there anything I can possibly do that could make a difference for my grandchildren and all the grandchildren who are growing up in this very challenging, very uncertain world? And so that was kind of the question that I brought with me on a vision quest that I did to the Bodhi tree in India. I sat under the Bodhi tree with that question. My question, which is also Ashling's question in the book, Mother Bodhi tree, the earth is in trouble, we're all in such trouble, what can I do to help? And what came to me was write a story. And I had, the one thing I had with me as I sat under the Bodhi tree that day, and it was pouring rain. It was the tail end of the monsoon, and it was pouring rain, so there was nobody else under the Bodhi tree, except one probably Cambodian or Vietnamese Buddhist monk who was sitting there with a huge umbrella, which he had somehow managed to, put in the wall, so he was sitting under a little dome. But anyway, I was sitting there in the rain, and the one thing I had with me in a plastic bag I brought in was my journal, a red journal, and so I started writing a book at that moment, and that's where the story started. But it was like at that stage, the story started, but I didn't know what it was about. And then I asked myself the question, what's the single most important lesson I've learned at my patient's bedside over the last 46 years? And what came to me is that if someone is rooted, like a tree is rooted in the forest, in the web of life, in not just a solitary tree, but it's part of this forest network, that's part of a wider network. If somebody is internally rooted in that way, in what isn't afraid and what doesn't die, we can survive anything. We can face even the most difficult times with open hearts. We can thrive in adversity. And that understanding our interdependence with the rest of life brings deep security, deep inner security. So that became the idea in the book, that there's a granddad who's a palliative care doctor who passes on a message to his granddaughter and says, I've seen that my patients who experience deep security have an easier time facing their death, and somehow they can make it easier for everyone around them because they're in such a good place in themselves. And he said, can you find a way of communicating this to others, particularly to young people? So that's her quest. Aisling takes that question and goes on a journey to find out, first of all, what does deep security mean, and then how can I possibly introduce others to this in a way that they can understand and experience the benefits. And so, not to give the story away, but one possible and very accessible way that Aisling demonstrates to Dorje as they walk their Camino in India, and they're under a banyan tree in the shade of the day one noon, and they're kind of teaching each other practices from their tradition. Aisling is coming from a Celtic, earth-based tradition, and Dorje is coming from a Tibetan tradition, a kind of Mahayana, Vajrayana Buddhism, mystical Buddhism. And so they're swapping practices as they're under the tree. And the practice that Aisling shares with Dorje is the practice of simply paying attention to the act of breathing. And something as ubiquitous and simple as breathing mindfully, how that can be a portal to our deeper identity. Because the act of breathing is an act of interdependence. We go into the reciprocal move between the leaves of our lungs and the lungs of the leaves. They are breathing out oxygen, we are breathing it in. We're letting go carbon dioxide, they're breathing it in. We're in this reciprocal interdependent flow. with the leaves and the trees and everything green around us. And so finally, just a few words, I mentioned at the beginning that the book is the kind of first step of what I hope will be what we're calling the Becoming Forest Project. And it's really at a very early stage, talking to people, and people I'm talking to are enthusiastic about it and want to be part of it, and we're kind of sitting together, seeing how this can emerge and how we can work with it, a bit like sitting in the forest waiting for the little green shoots to arrive. But we're working on it. It's on its way. And again, thanks to Ben for this. He said, well, you really have to kind of think what you're offering, and it's got to be something that people need and will want. And so what we've come to is that what the Becoming Forest Project is about, it's about deep resilience training for uncertain times. So we'll be offering deep resilience training for uncertain times. And it's really the kind of core idea there is that we have an inner ecology, our deep inner life. We know the outer ecology of the forest. If we just tend our inner ecology, if our spirituality is just about our own well-being, then our world burns down. If we just tend outer ecology, and you can see this in some so well-meaning activists and often young activists, if we just try and change outer ecology in the best way we possibly can, we're in danger of burning out. So we need both. We need to tend our inner ecology because it's intimately, indivisibly connected with outer ecology. And that's kind of the core idea. We need both. So I'm going to read a little bit from the book, if that's okay, Michael. And just to give a little introduction to the piece I'm going to read, this is towards the end of the book. And it's part of a conversation that's taking place between Aisling, and this is a giveaway, but the book comes in thirds, and the first third is in Santa Barbara, the second third is in India, in Bodh Gaya, and the final third is in Ireland, and is 30 years in the future.
Okay.
So Aisling is now in her 50s. Her young daughter Tara is part of this conversation, and Greta, who is Aisling's grandmother, actually, so she's Tara's great-grandmother, is also in the story. And she is now, she's in her 90s, she's frail, she's in bed, but she's an amazing human being, and they're having this conversation among themselves. So I'm just going to read you a little bit about from that conversation. As Tara sat on the side of the bed, Gran took one of her hands, Gran is Greta, and reached the other out to Aisling, who came closer, forming a circle. Gran said nothing as she looked up, smiling, first at one, then at the other. Tara noticed how her face seemed to be bathed in a gentle light, and that she was now looking past both of them. Ah, tonight, the full moon, Gran said. Tara and Aisling turned towards the window and saw the moon, round and pale orange, just above the horizon. They stayed holding hands for a while, watching as the moon began to light up the waters of the bay. Then Gran turned to Tara. What were you two talking about out there? You both sounded very animated. I'm sorry for waking you, Tara said. I guess the volume knob must have gone up without our noticing it. We were discussing my end-of-term essay, and I was interviewing Mum. What's it about? Gran asked. She released their hands and picked up her prayer wheel, saying, I'd love to hear more about it. She listened attentively as Tara described how so many of her friends were burned out and disillusioned, and how she wanted to offer some ideas and ways to help them. I share your concerns, my love, she said. I've always felt it was so unfair that we old ones created such a catastrophic mess and then expected you young ones to clear it up. Gran, do you have some wisdom to share with my friends? Tara asked. Gran thought for a while. Then, still spinning her prayer wheel, she said, "The best way I can respond is to quote you a line from one of my favorite poems. You may know it. St. Kevin and the Blackbird by Seamus Heaney. Here was a man, St. Kevin, who'd been living alone in the natural world so long that he'd become invisible, in the sense that he'd become so at home in the wild that he no longer stood out as different from the rest of the landscape. One day he was praying with his arms stretched out and his hands upturned, when along came a blackbird who mistook him for a tree. So she made a nest in his upturned palm and laid her eggs in it and settled down on them and stayed there like that until the young were hatched and fledged and flown." Then comes the line I'm thinking about. As Kevin cradles the eggs and the small warm body of the bird in the palm of his hand, he, quote, finds himself linked into the network of eternal life and is moved to pity, end quote. For me, that says it all. Tara was silent, waiting to see if Gran was going to say more. After a few moments, she continued, "I once heard a Native American elder say, once we connect with the land, we'll do anything to protect it. And I remember how she also said, water is not a metaphor for life. Water is life. My primary path has been Buddhism, as it was for your dad. But what I learned from your mom and your dad, and of course from Bran, is that the path of nature is one and the same in a very accessible, tangible form. Both paths bring us into an experience of our absolute inseparability from the web of life, or as your dad would call it, the field of lively, loving, awake awareness. So my advice to young people is to connect with nature deeply in whatever ways you can. This will link you into the network of eternal life and bring you unimaginable joy." "But Gran," Tara suddenly exclaimed, "what if it's already too late? What if this is the end of the line for humanity? What if this is what the apocalypse feels like? Are we just deluding ourselves to think we can save anything?" Tara stopped, breathless and shocked by the wave of despair that swept through her. Gran put down her prayer wheel and took both Tara's hands in hers. Aisling drew closer and put an arm around Tara's shoulder. "I don't know," Gran said softly. "Maybe it is, or maybe it isn't. We were asking ourselves these same questions 30 years ago. Your dad used to quote his teacher saying, 'Live every day as if it's your last.' Maybe this is a good attitude in any case. Being kind to one another, giving thanks for the good things in our lives, saving what can be saved, growing what can be grown, loving who and what can be loved, forgiving and caring for one another." Tara, my love, when I look into your sweet face, I see all the young people of our world, and standing behind them the future ones who are yet to be born, and I hear their voices in yours and in your questions. I can't tell you that it's going to be okay, because you only have to look around you to know it's not okay now, and so much remains uncertain. What I can tell you for certain is that you and the earth are one living whole. My prayer for you is that you'll come to know this for yourself and what it means, and learn to trust this, even at those times, and there'll be many, when you don't feel it. And I encourage you, please, to choose one small act that you can do on behalf of our Mother Earth, and then go and do it. Don't focus on outcome. That's beyond your control. What's in your control is to act. Remember what the great historian Howard Zinn said. Small acts multiplied by millions of people can transform the world. When you do something with the welfare of the earth and others in mind, you're already making a difference. Did you know that tipping points in social change happen when just 1 in 4 of us choose to act in a particular way? No act is too small to make history. The main thing is to hand yourself over in service to the living earth. Then, even if things don't work out as you would like them to, your intention to act for the welfare of all beings can only be for the good. And of course, go on using that wild and creative brain of yours as best you can.
Shall we open to questions?
Sure.
Yeah.
If anybody has any
Comments or
Any
questions?
comments
Feel
or
free to
questions?
comment if you don't have a question.
So you do have a poem in there.
do I?
Did you leave it out?
Probably. Oh yeah, Seamus Heaton. Yeah, I'd forgotten that. Yeah,
You're a
thank you,
poet
Alan.
too.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
I always like to ask people, how were you changed by writing this book? Excuse me.
Can you repeat the question?
I asked, how were you changed
By writing
this
the book.
process? In this particular book?
Well, the book is very biographical, very autobiographical. So I kind of, most of what's in the book, I've kind of lived in some shape or form, including at the end of the book. The end of the book is, I say, 30 years in the future, and it's set in West Cork, in Ireland, in Southern Ireland, and Aisling and her husband Dorje are there planting trees together. And I've just come back from West Cork in Ireland, where my brother and his wife have planted 100,000 trees and are rewilding a whole headland. So it's I mean, that's just one detail of how the book is kind of weaving in and out. And yeah, it's a big part of why I've chosen to step back from my full-time work at this stage to have. So it's made a huge difference. Something just beginning.
Can you talk more about the project?
So the project, what I said already, Harlan, is kind of almost, that we're going to offer trainings, what we call deep resilience training. So it really will be a collection of different doorways into an experience of our interdependence with the rest of life. So some of that will be through meditation, some of that will be through nature connection, some of that may be, we're working, there's a new project in town at the moment called the Empathy Project, and some of it will be with a project like that, which is about building bridges with others who share different opinions to us, so rebuilding the kind of torn web of life and feeling how that is in ourselves as we're in a kind of stronger sense of our interdependence. So lots of different practices, and I kind of list some of them in here.
Okay.
At the back of the book, a little bit more information about it. And there's a link at the back to, it's becomingforest.com, www, but it actually takes you to my website, and on the website there's a page with kind of some more information. But that's kind of a placeholder at the moment, but that will be where more detail will be as we
What's
go
your
along.
website title?
My website is michaelcarneymd.com.
I'm Dina. Got it.
Yeah, and there are some meditations and practices on the website which are kind of similar to the ones that come up in the book as well. So they're free, they're available if anybody's interested. Thank you, Harlan, for that. Bradley.
Yeah, I'm very excited about bridge between internal and external, internal ecology and external ecology. And, you know, because often meditators are quite internal and activists are quite external. And I think bringing this together, I'm really excited about, and I'm curious how you will roll that out.
Well, I think the main emphasis of the project is going to be, as in the book, on the inner ecology, but with a specific intention, and that is to sink our roots, to drop our roots into what the phrase I'm using is what isn't afraid and what doesn't die. I gave a little PowerPoint talk, about my book recently, and I was able to tell the story of a tree that I came across up in Big Sur that had been very badly burnt by one of the recent fires that passed through up there. And the redwood had been so badly burnt that the trunk had broken halfway off, and it was just there as a black stump in the ground. And but when I came back a year later, that stump was totally transformed. These green shoots were springing out everywhere, and green shoots were coming up from the roots of the tree and from the ground around it, from the roots. And for me, that's an image of deep resilience. That when we're, so that resurgence, that regeneration didn't come through the leaves or the branches. It came from the earth. It came from the ground. It came from that web that the tree is part of. An interesting thing about redwoods is they're the tallest trees in the world. They, over 300 feet, some of them, but they have a very shallow root system. They don't have tap roots. They actually have these incredible lateral root systems that intertwine with the roots of all the other redwoods around them. And it's that lateral interweaving that gives them their incredible strength and resilience. And that, so deep resilience is about tapping into that. And I think with bridging the inner ecology with outer ecology, I think if we really come into that sense of our interdependence, that we are what Thich Nhat Hanh calls interbeings, that we're not little billiard balls, we're more like ocean and waves. But if we really come into that sense of how interconnected and interdependent, when I gave that talk I just mentioned on the book about 3 weeks ago now, I was in London and I was staying with my youngest daughter, and my latest grandchild, my 6th grandchild, Nico, was just 3 weeks old at that stage. 3 weeks old at that stage. Yeah, I was 3 weeks old. And what struck me was just how incredibly dependent we are as babies, as human beings. Everything, everything. We can't do anything for ourselves. Everything has to be done by mother and father. But what we don't realize is that we are equally as dependent on the earth for everything. Everything. We are that dependent on the earth. So I don't know if we come into that sense of our dependence, and it's more this sense of interdependence that we there's this deep reciprocity. And I think as we come into an experience of that and an awareness of that, we realize that everything is, we're related to everything. As Wolf Wapipo says, we're all relatives, we're all kin. And that kind of brings a sense of solidarity. It brings deep resilience. It brings a deep sense of belonging, the subtitle of the book, because we're no longer solitary little billiard balls, we're now part of a web. And it brings a great desire to look after those we care about. And I think we feel that more deeply when we feel our interdependence. So, yeah. Any other questions?
I think that's a good
Comments?
note to end on.
Okay.
Shall we sign some books?
Yeah.
All right. Once again, Dr. Michael Kearney.